Well, hello, Hot Springs, with all your healing crystals and your beautiful skies and your nice warm weather here. And this is the anti-penultimate, or actually the penultimate day. Anti-penultimate was yesterday, penultimate day before July the 4th, which is our celebration of the Declaration of Independence, when it was actually first written. And yet, there's all these strange issues about when was it finally read aloud, when was it signed. Well, we celebrate the 4th of July for the Declaration of Independence. I went to school in Philadelphia, to the University of Pennsylvania. And of course, we know the Liberty Bell, which supposedly was rung on that day. Well, it actually was rung on July the 8th. And it didn't break on that day, but it does have a break in it, which did not occur until 1835. I just want to bring you up to date with a lot of VT, vital statistics, that a lot of people just really are not too clear about. But what I want to do is to read to you some of the material about the American Revolution, the War of Independence, and I'm actually going to read you the Declaration of Independence. I used to have to write it out by hand, as I did the Constitution, as I did most of the books of the Bible, as a punishment at my prep school, which was a country day school, a church school, founded by Bishop Cassidy, and it was called Cassidy School. And we were given demerits for being errant miscreants during the week, and then we worked those demerits off on the weekends by sitting in a room by ourselves on Saturdays, writing out the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. I know things that perhaps I don't need to know. I mean, entire books of the Bible, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to know certain things. In any case, I want to read to you some material. The American Revolutionary War had its origins in the resistance of many Americans to taxes. The Patriots' protests, the most famous one, was on December the 16th, 1773. That was the destruction of an entire shipment of tea, and that has been called the Boston Tea Party. Ain't it strange that people who now are claiming they want to return to America's greatness are members of what they call the Tea Party, and they are very, very reactionary, right-wing, angry people. But in the original movement, it was that the taxes were too high, and the patriots of Boston, well, they just destroyed that shipment of tea. So the British retaliated by closing down the port of Boston and removing all self-government from any of the people of Boston. Then the patriots responded by setting up a shadow government that took control of the province outside of Boston. 12 other colonies supported the state that it was located in, Massachusetts, and they formed a Continental Congress to coordinate the resistance and set up committees and conventions to effectively seize power. The British attempts to seize American guns, gunpowder, and ammunition in April 1775 was the cause for the start of the hostilities at the battles of Lexington and Concord. Those were in Middlesex County, just outside of Boston. And this began the armed conflict between the kingdom, well, the King of Great Britain, and 13 of his colonies. The Continental Congress, which I just mentioned before, that had been formed from this group in Boston, Massachusetts, and then combining all the other colonies, that group appointed General George Washington to take command of a militia units that were then to besiege British forces in Boston, and they were able to force them to evacuate the city in March of 1776. We're rolling on up to 1776. Congress supervised the war, giving Washington command of the new Continental Army, and he also coordinated all state militia units. By the way, you know there's a part in the Constitution of the United States, which I will read to you later, where we are granted the right to form militias to bear arms. It doesn't say individuals, though. It says militia. But the NRA would be very angry at me for asking that they look at the actual wording of that amendment to the Constitution. On July the 2nd of 1776, the Continental Congress formally voted for independence, and on July the 4th issued the Declaration of Independence. But it was not until August the 2nd of 1776 that the Declaration of Independence was taken into place and first signed then by Delaware. Meanwhile, the British were mustering forces to suppress the revolt. Sir William Howe outmaneuvered and defeated Washington, capturing New York City and New Jersey. Washington was able to capture a Hessian detachment at Trenton and drive the British out of most of New Jersey. But in 1777, Howe's army launched a campaign against the national capital at Philadelphia. And failing to aid Burgoyne's separate invasion force from Canada, Burgoyne's army was trapped and surrendered after the Battle of Saratoga in October 1777. The important issue was that had Howe been at all aware of what was going on, when he was fighting Washington in literally Manhattan, and Washington then held him up in Harlem Heights, up in Harlem, which is, we know where that is in Manhattan, he actually could have been cut off on several occasions and crushed. But Howe, for some reason, just didn't seem to be aware of the weakness and the power that he could have exerted. Let me tell you something about the power of the forces at that time. The British nation, well, the British kingdom, Britain and Ireland combined, what we call the United Kingdom today, numbered 12.6 million. Far cry from what it is. It's over 60 million today, but 12.6 million. But the American population was 2.8 million. And I was told by one of my American history professors once, I haven't found any proof of it, that 50% of the Americans were under the age of 25. So we really were a bunch of rebellious kind of post-teenagers. But anyway, of that 2.5 million, 500,000, 1/2 were slaves, African slaves. Now, it's a curious thing. In this war, the British were clever enough to enlist several thousand Africans who wanted freedom to serve for them as soldiers, promising them freedom, that they would be free men forever. So Washington, in, reaction to that, and actually very unhappily, because he was a major slave owner, as were most of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, all of them, they all had slaves. 5,000 Africans, black Africans, were made into soldiers, into special military units that fought for Washington, promised freedom after the war. So that was curious, but 25,000 of the 500,000 slaves, they escaped or they were killed. These are just some statistics most people don't really pay much attention to, but I also want to point out some things that everybody should know, but I'm not sure if they do. That we owe a great deal to France and Spain. France and Spain began providing the colonists with weapons, ammunition, and other vital supplies, even blankets of all things, and boots, and in April of 1776. After Saratoga, after the defeat at Saratoga in 1777, France formally entered the war, and they were in the war as our allies in 1778, and Spain also then joined the war in 1779 as an ally of France. Well, that's pretty amazing. It was in 1778 that the British, having failed to have much progress and much meaningful victory in the north, they shifted to the south, and they could then brought Georgia and South Carolina under the control by 1779 1780. But the resulting surge of loyalist support, far weaker than expected, in 1781 the British forces moved through Virginia and settled at Yorktown. But their escape was blocked by a French naval victory in September. The French, using their ships, using their navy, along with the Spanish, were actually helping to keep the British from aiding and supplying their people on the American continent. Led by Count Rochambeau, George Washington led, with Count Rochambeau, a Franco-American army, a French-American army, and they laid siege to Yorktown and captured more than 8,000 British troops in October 1781. And the defeat at Yorktown, it finally convinced British Parliament that it was time to leave the war. So in early 1782, they voted to end all offensive operations in North America. So when was the end of our War of Revolution? Well, it was bizarre. The Treaty of Paris ended the war, and of course it's in 1783. And then it was pretty amazing, because we then were able to finally feel that we were an independent country after that time. I have a great-great-great-grandfather whose name was Henry Buck, Dr. Henry Buck, who served with George Washington in Philadelphia, and he established a field clinic there with the troops in Valley Forge. And he was in combat, and after the war he remained on active duty in the American Continental Army until 1792. Okay, the Treaty of Paris was in 1783, finally, 82 and 83 was finalized. But he kept on fighting. It seems that the British continued, what they did was they continued to rally the Native Americans as allies, and were starting all kinds of little minor upsurgences and virtual civil wars throughout America, until, of course, we know the War of 1812, when the British again declared war. We have Andrew Jackson winning at New Orleans, but the war had already been declared over at that point. That was very strange. But Dr. Henry Buck's sons were in rifle divisions as infantrymen, as private soldiers, and they fought in that war of 1812. Rather amazing. The most critical battle was the one at Yorktown. And what had happened there was that Washington's troops were very close to mutiny. They had no food, no uniforms, no supplies, no money to pay them, and Washington needed at least $20,000 to finance the campaign in Yorktown. And he had no funds and no credit available. So Washington sent for a man named Haym, H-A-Y-M, Salomon, S-A-L-O-M-O-N, who was a Polish Jew who had come to America and loved America, and Salomon raised $20,000. And he gave it to Washington so that he could conduct the Yorktown campaign, which was the final battle of the Revolution. Salomon negotiated the sale of a majority of the war aid from France and the Dutch Republic, selling bills of exchange to American merchants. Salomon also personally supported various members of the Continental Congress during their stay in Philadelphia, including James Madison and James Wilson. He bequeathed below market value interest rates. He never asked for repayment. And it's very sad because Salomon died a debtor, a penniless debtor. And he died very young, at the age of 45. And it was Alexander Hamilton who spent several years repaying the debts to France. But we were helped by other sort of unusual people from France, one particularly being the Marquis of Lafayette. And the Marquis of Lafayette, of course, we all know about his help. He arrived as a young man, and he promised to send, he brought over 6,000 soldiers. He was involved with most of the conflicts. Washington placed him in charge of a whole division of troops, and he spent lavishly on his commands. And many years later, of course, in Paris, he was the host to Jefferson and to Ben Franklin and to Adams and to all of our diplomats who'd gone there. The problem for him was that he was part of the royals. He was a marquis. He was an aristocrat. And yet he was a firm, deep, dedicated believer in democracy and the equal rights of man. And he actually had put together a foundation to abolish slavery early in the 1770s. And he argued often with Thomas Jefferson about his owning of slaves. Jefferson, of course, when he came as our ambassador to Paris, brought Sally Hemings, his woman, who was the half-sister of his wife, who had died. Actually, his wife's father had a Negro slave that bore him a daughter, and was actually then was the half-sister of Jefferson's original wife, and she was African American. And yet she was very, very similar in appearance to the white wife of Jefferson, and many people mistook her for being white. However, he never freed her, although he freed all of her children. That's a very curious remark, and the man who was the father of our independence and who virtually wrote the Declaration of Independence, which I am now going to read to you. And then, of course, I'm going to also play some music for you, which is considered patriotic music. And I'm going to talk about the songs that became our favorite patriotic songs in the Revolution. And I'm also going to talk about some things that are happening here in Hot Springs. But right now, the subject is the American Revolution. And the American Revolution was declared in the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson was a genius. He attended an academy that was established by James Fontaine Maury in Virginia. At the age of 14, he said, I was orphaned at 14 and had the good fortune to be sent to the academy of James Fontaine Maury. And for that reason, I sent Monroe and Madison there as well. Again, I'm fortunate in having a great-great-great-grandfather, relation named James Fontaine Maury. Interesting. I'm really an American boy. I want to read you now the Declaration of Independence. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them to another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Well, that's clearly stating that it's going to be obvious that according to the laws of man and those bestowed on man by God, that people who are needing to rule themselves must declare why. And we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My British friends always say, you Americans are just always looking for a good time. You say you're entitled to the pursuit of happiness. And I said, yes, indeed. I guess we are just sybaritic, self-centered, self-determining, self-actualizing, independent Americans. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness, there's that word again, prudence. Indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And here we have a list of grievances. I'm going to read some of them. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He's refused for a long time after such disillusions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. Well, that's interesting. Jefferson is demanding that we have a little more well, a little more open policy in our welcoming of strangers. And of course, that's what made our country great. Immigrants, especially people like Chaim Solomon. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He's made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He's erected a multitude of new offices, sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He's kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, by transporting us beyond seas to be tried by pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most malleable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all causes whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He's plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and he has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an indistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In other words, he's been stirring up the natives against us good colonists here, and they did continue to do so with the Native Americans. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, the General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Well, the men who were to then sign this Declaration of Independence might be signing their death warrants. And all of them realized that they might actually be considered as, truly evil and needed to be, Well, what they used to do to these kinds of people was half-hanging and quartering. That was actually what the British had already done to several of the people that revolted against them in Scotland. They brought them to London and then went through the ritual of half-hanging and then quartering them after disemboweling them publicly. But these men knew that they were facing some pretty grim situations. I want to go on and read to you what came out of all this. The Constitution of the United States. The convention was Monday, September 17th, 1787. And I'm just going to read you some of the amendments. I know you all probably think you know the amendments, but let me just read them to you and remind you, because I think it's important to know. The First Amendment: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for redress of grievances. We talk about our freedom of speech and our freedom to assemble. I've been in countries, Russia, where it was unlawful to assemble. I've been in Spain, where it was unlawful to assemble. And if I wanted to get together with some of my students in the days when I was teaching in Spain, I had to be very careful where I met and to be able to move out in case we knew the Guardia Civil were coming under Francisco Generalissimo Franco. Amendment 2. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That says a militia has the right to bear arms, but a free people, that's still a group noun. I am wondering what the NRA says in answer to this, because they say each individual has that right. Amendment 3, we'd heard how upset Jefferson was about the people who were placed in the quarters and lived off the colonialists. It just says here, no soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. That's Amendment 3. Amendment 5, I'm going to read. People always say, well, I took the fifth on that one. I said, I cannot incriminate myself. Let me read you the whole thing. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, that's like murder, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation, which segues right into Amendment 6, which is what we often refer to as the habeas corpus, which was suspended by Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War. And of course, that's when the Sedition Act was put into effect, which is what President Wilson used to send Eugene Debs to prison, who said that he was actually speaking against the president and fomenting rebellion under the Sedition Act. But listen to habeas corpus, which we do have as our Amendment 6, a right in the Constitution. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right of a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. The first court-martial that Ensign Ben Wright, myself, defended in 1961 was the United States Navy, the Uniform Code of Military Justice versus Gerald Muck, that was his name, from Mena, Arkansas, a seaman recruit who had been charged with something like 6 offenses and many charges within those offenses. And I defended his rights because, in actual fact, his property had been invaded. He had been actually forced into confessions under duress, under coercion, and kept asleep for days on end and almost tortured into his confessions. And there were no witnesses confronting him in the court. But the court-martial found him guilty on all charges and sentenced him to the complete maximum punishment. I then pleaded the case to the Judge Advocate General's Court, the Supreme Court of the United States Navy, the United States military. And within 3 months, we received reversal of the decision based upon Gerald Muck's violation, or being violated, his constitutional rights to a fair trial. He had a defense counsel, me, Ben Wright, and yet his witnesses, there were no witnesses against him, and he had been deprived of his rights by his property being openly without a warrant, and there was just no evidence of a prima facie a degree of a legally admissible degree. And he was released, and I was congratulated, and I then went on to become a trial counsel, a defense counsel, and many other courts-martials held against enlisted men in the Navy, and I won every one of them. That case against Gerald Muck, I was confronting a Yale-trained lawyer with the rank of full lieutenant, that was 2 grades above me, who used as an assistant a Marine Corps major who had conducted many courts-martial and convicted many men on many occasions. And I won the case. I actually called the Marine Corps major as a witness, so he had to leave the courtroom, and that I fought my way through the turmoil the next 2 days. In any case, I'm going to read a few more amendments here. Amendment 8. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Some men on death row in Oklahoma have claimed that their 8th Amendment to the Constitution has been violated because the means of executing them using lethal injections has not been, well, it's been excessively cruel. It's taken some of the men a long time to die. We all know, I hope we know, the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereas the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Well, that's, I think, finally, all of the states have finally signed that agreement to that amendment. And then we have, of course, the 18th Amendment, which was prohibition, which prohibited the sale of alcohol from the years of 1919 to 1933, when the 21st Amendment repealed that amendment. I just wanted to go over these particular amendments, but a very special one, which was put into our Constitution in 1971, Amendment 26. The right of citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of age. The Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Well, that is the most important and the last of, well, that is a very important but it's the last of our amendments to the Constitution. The music that came out of the Civil War, I'm just going to say, singing a song in Revolutionary America was not necessarily an innocent act. At the time, almost everyone sang in public on occasion, either for entertainment, for worship, or as part of their work. However, songs were also important instruments of satire and mockery. People used them to make fun of public figures, to pass ugly rumors, or to playfully insult their enemies, and sometimes their friends. As opposition to the British rule in the American colonies heated up, satirical songs took on a new edge. Rebellious colonists sang songs insulting Britain's King George III as a drunken tyrant. Well, actually, he was suffering from a form of delirium tremens, too, so we know, or maybe incipient Alzheimer's. Anyway, the man was called the Mad King George. And British soldiers answered these songs, ridiculing the Americans as backwoods yokels, as hicks, as hillbillies, as, oh, well, you know. One of these songs, which told the story of a poorly dressed Yankee simpleton or doodle, was so popular with British troops that they played it as they marched to battle on the first day of the Revolutionary War up there in Lexington and Concord. However, the rebels quickly claimed the song as their own and then created dozens of new verses that mocked the British and praised the new Continental Army and hailed and praised and, well, glorified their commander, George Washington. By 1781, when the British surrendered at Yorktown, being called a Yankee Doodle had gone from being an insult to a point of pride, and the song had become the new republic's official national anthem.
There was Captain Washington upon a slapping stallion, giving orders to his men. I guess there was a million. Yankee Doodle, keep it up. Yankee Doodle dandy. Mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. Then the feathers on his hat, they look so very fine. I wanted desperately to get to give to my Jemima. Yankee Doodle, keep it up. Yankee Doodle dandy. Mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. Yankee Doodle, keep it up. Yankee Doodle dandy. Mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy.
That was Yankee Doodle Dandy. Now, the other songs that we consider to be our national songs virtually, the Star-Spangled Banner is considered the national anthem of the United States of America. The lyrics come from the defense of Fort McHenry. This is later, of course, in 1814. It was written in 1814 by the 35-year-old lawyer, Francis Scott Key. He witnessed the bombardment of Fort McHenry by British ships of the Royal Navy in Baltimore Harbor and during the Battle of Fort McHenry in the War of 1812. Key was inspired by the large American flag, the Star-Spangled Banner, flying triumphantly above the fort during the American victory. The poem was set to the tune of a popular British song written by John Standard Smith for the a men's club in London, and it was various lyrics. It was already popular in the United States, but set to Key's poem and renamed the Star-Spangled Banners, it became well-known American patriotic song. With a range of 1 octave, 1/5, it's somewhat more than an octave and a half. It's known as being difficult to sing. Well, the poem has 4 stanzas. Only the first is commonly sung today. It was the Star-Spangled Banner was recognized for official use by the United States Navy in 1889, by the U.S. President Wilson in 1916. He made it our national anthem, and it was thus established by congressional resolution in March the 3rd, 1931. Um, in any case, oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous flight, or the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? On the shore dimly seen through the mists of the deep, where the foe's haughty host in dread silence reposes, what is that which the breeze o'er the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half conceals, half discloses? Now it catches the gleam of the morning's first beam, in full glory reflected, now shines on the stream. 'Tis the star-spangled banner, oh, long may it wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. And where is that land, that band, which is so vaunting, who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country should leave us no more? Their blood has washed out their foul footsteps' pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. And thus be it ever, when free men shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation, blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust, and the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. I don't think I knew all of those verses, and yet they're there. And of course, we also think of America the Beautiful. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plains. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crowned thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Beautiful for patriot dream that sees beyond the years, and alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. And then we had our Civil War and the Battle Hymn of Republic, which was the marching song for basically the Union, but it was sung by both sides. My great-great-grandfather was, actually my great-great-grandfather was Dr. Henry Buck as well, raised a company of men in Ohio. He was a Methodist minister, a medical doctor, and he said, if you follow me into combat against what I consider the evil of slavery, we will fight against the Confederacy, and if you're wounded, I will heal you. If I can't heal you, I'll send you to heaven, so follow me. And they made him captain and followed him in combat. And he served in the Civil War, and of course this was the marching song, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which both sides sang, and I'm going to click over to Johnny Cash doing his version.
It was reportedly sung by both sides in the Civil War, which proves one thing to me, that a song can belong to all of us. You don't have to be a rich man to have a beautiful thing like music. I could close my eyes and hear this song and picture a group of beaten, wounded, ragged Civil War soldiers trying to make that last mile home after the last battle. And if there was strength for a song, this would have been a great inspiration. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
that was Johnny Cash with the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And I wanted to just mention, we were talking about all of the people in the Revolution, but I didn't mention certain women. Margaret Corbin, and then there was Molly Pitcher, and then there was Sybil Luddington, who was the woman, Paul Revere, who rode all through the night through Danbury, Connecticut, warning people of the British are coming, the British are coming. And she was incredibly heroic because she had to fight off highwaymen and so on her way to do that. But Margaret Corbin became known as Captain Molly. She was working with the, it was an amazing thing. She was working with the troops, and she had was under fire, and she was wounded in the arm, but she kept on going and fighting. She was Captain Molly. And then there was Sergeant Molly, another nickname given to Molly Pitcher, who kept bringing water to the men. But there's a great singer that I want you to hear now, and he is a person that was in the airborne. He was a paratrooper, but when Vietnam came along, he wanted out, and he wanted to hit the road and sing songs, and actually he became a great, when Michael Harrer died last week, who wrote dispatches about Vietnam, and he said whenever he thought of Vietnam, he thought of Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix was a member of the elite airborne paratroopers, but here he is with his Star-Spangled Banner. Well, we're going on home now, and this is KUHS LP Hot Springs 97.9. Big Ben and Company saying goodbye for now.